Hey everybody, so welcome to the last video. Well, maybe I'll have a couple videos here, but like the last lesson in our processing, introduction to processing, so we can use it for their project. I wrote some code for you guys that is going to make your life a little bit easier and make it a little easier to keep track of different, having like less variables in your code. I've kind of packaged some things together that I think should make your life a little bit easier. So what I have on the screen is kind of a build off of what we've done in previous work where we had things bouncing off the walls and I think we had them changing colors. Um, but yeah, I think in this case I'm just having two things. You'll notice that they're having different colors. And what I've done is I've actually simplified our code quite a bit where each one of these things is a little package of information that keeps track. Each one of these things has access to, or kind of packages it up. Its color, its stroke value, its X, Y, width, height, and it's all conveniently packaged up into one location. So typically, I think you guys could probably write the code that would make something like this appear, but you might have a whole bunch of variables. Like I need to have X, Y, width, height for each object. Maybe you don't need width and height, but you definitely need the X and the Y. You would need to have a variable to keep track of colors. Maybe you have to one for each RGB. But I've really simplified this down to, in my methods when I write this, I only really need to have two things here. I need to have this thing, and I need to have my rectangle. And I'm doing speed just kind of like what we've done before, just to keep track of the things, how fast they're moving. So I do have those variables as kind of an extra, but I've really condensed down. Typically, the way we would have had this, we would have had, anywhere between 6 to 10 variables to keep track of the object, and I've condensed those down into just two. We can see how this is working. Main is not going to be any different. Setup, I am creating these two variables, so I'll get into that in a second. Settings, no different, and draw is going to be slightly different. So let's look at the two different things that we have here. How do we create a rectangle? How do we create an ellipse? These are two, we will call them eventually classes, but they are just two files, two collections of information that we have available to us. And let's just see how we can use those in our code. So what I'm going to do is inside of setup, I'm going to create these things. I'm going to initialize them and create them. We can see that happening right here. So I'm saying let's just look at one at a time. So let's just look at the rectangle. I am going to say rectangle. I'm declaring a rectangle up here called rect1. I'm going to say, hey, this rectangle is going to be equal to a new rectangle. And I'm going to need to pass in this. We're going to skip over that for now. Just know that whenever you have to make a rectangle, we're going to have to pass in the keyword this. We'll get into this much later on in the course, but for now, we'll just kind of keep that. You just need to enter it every time, but we can understand the other things. This rectangle, when we create a rectangle, we're going to pass in a few values that you can definitely figure out, right? We're going to pass in the starting X value, the starting Y value, the width, and the height. And then we can add in the color too. We could write this same code without passing in the color. If I delete this, I made a couple different ways for you to create rectangles. In one version, you just don't give it a color at all, and it will default to black. I think we can see that working. If we were to run this, we could see that we have a default. Right, the color's still updating afterwards, but when we first create it, it would just be one color, just be black to begin with. So if we don't, so I'll show you a couple different ways, and I'll go in a little more depth, and hopefully make a written document to support this as well. But we can either declare what our color is going to be or not. If we don't, defaults to black. And then we're doing basically the same thing for ellipse. We still have to pass in that very mysterious this keyword, but then otherwise the X, Y, width, height, and color. Okay, so that's kind of creating an object. It's really pretty straightforward. Especially if you don't include the color, it's just X, Y, width, height. Oh, also for the color, this is like creating a single color, like we're kind of using like the color method. If you're not comfortable with that, I also set it up so that you could pass in just 3 values. So I could pass in like RGB values for this. This is my first one's my R, then my G, and then my B value. You can totally do that. That's all totally fine. This would create a perfectly red circle or red rectangle. Technically, it's a square, but so there's multiple ways to go in this, and I will create some documentation for this if you don't see it already. We'll also go through how I wrote this code, and you can kind of see what's going on here. Okay, so yeah, we created a rectangle. We're having a rectangle. So now, an ellipse is very similar. It has all the same methods, all the same kind of things that we could. We can cut this out too, no problem. All right, so let's look into how I'm making this thing work, and that's going to happen inside of Draw. So I think the key things here is that I have written some code. For example, let's just look through the two things. Let's ignore this kind of bouncing stuff. We can get to that in a second. But let's just look at and we'll even ignore the ellipse too. Let's just look at the rectangle. Okay, so what I'm doing up here inside of the setup is I'm creating a rectangle on the screen. It's going to appear on the screen. And then I can kind of talk to it. I can give it commands. And the commands that I'm giving to my rectangle are, one, move by whatever speed I defined up here. I defined the speed of our rectangle should be 15. So I said move in the x coordinate, in the x plane, by whatever speed rectangle is. So it's going to move by x is going to be 15. And then I said for the y, move it to 0 so you don't kind of go up and down. I could mess around with this. I could say, the only problem is it's going to go off screen, but I can do something like this. I'll make it kind of move at a slight angle. Let's get this back in so we still get some bouncing. And then we run this code. If it runs. For some reason it was pausing and showed me like 5 of them, but here we do this. Now we're doing our movement, and it's kind of bouncing on down the screen. Because what I adjusted was the Y value here. Okay, so I need a little maybe overview of other methods that we have available to us. So let's consider the bouncing thing. Before, when I did this previously, I just had like an X variable, a Y variable that I was kind of keeping track of. And I had a width variable and a height variable. Now I've packaged all of this stuff inside of the rectangle class, inside of that rectangle kind of object. We'll get into objects and all that stuff later. But just so you know, like if we want to access the X coordinate for a rectangle, we can say get X. If we want to access the Y, we'd say get Y. If we want to access the width of a rectangle, we say get width. Okay, so what I'm doing in here is I'm just pulling out the X value and pulling out the width because I want to make sure that the rectangle goes all the way, just touches the edge of the screen and heads back. So I want to get its X value plus the width to kind of detect when it's hitting the edge of the screen. Let's see, I have some other methods in here too, and this is the beautiful part and why I think this is so valuable is that the rectangle is going to keep track of its color, and before it gets drawn, it's going to kind of set its own fill, draw it, and then it will return to. It'll set the fill in the parent back to whatever it was originally. I think I might have to set some stuff up to make that happen. But all right, so the key things that we have here are we have a move method, we have a display method. So display, you're going to need to call every single time you do draw, because that's what's causing the thing to actually appear on the screen. We need to constantly draw it. Let's see how we do on time. I will stop it there. I might make another quick video going through a tour of kind of what's happening in the background.